It was the leaks that broke him. David Foster, long a trusted figure behind the scenes of fame, had guided Prince Harry through the chaos of royal separation with measured care and personal mentorship. But when private details about their security dealings began surfacing, confidential plans Foster had helped orchestrate, the betrayal hit deeper than any tabloid could print. Foster, used to navigating fame's shadows quietly, suddenly found his name pulled into the glare of public controversy, and the source pointed squarely to within Harry and Meghan's camp.
If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update.
This was a final fracture in a relationship already strained by broken financial promises and diverging values. Foster's decision to publicly distance himself, most visibly through the couple's absence at his hallmark Christmas gala, underscores the severity of the breach. In a world where loyalty is prized and reputations are fragile, Foster's withdrawal isn't just personal. It's a message to the Hollywood elite about the high cost of misplaced trust. David Foster's annual Christmas party in Santa Barbara has always been a kind of unofficial roll call for who still matters in elite Hollywood circles. It's polished, private, and carefully curated. The guest list signals loyalty, trust, and relevance. This year, that signal was unmistakable. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were not there. No polite excuse floated afterward. No scheduling conflict whispered to soften the blow. Their absence spoke louder than an invitation ever could. For people who followed Foster's long career, this wasn't a random social snub. Foster has built his reputation not just on musical success, but on discretion and long memory. He doesn't cut people out lightly. When he does, it's deliberate. Insiders immediately read the missing Sussexes as a message. Something had broken, and it wasn't getting fixed behind closed doors. Foster, by all accounts, was done. The Christmas party was simply the public punctuation mark at the end of a relationship that had been unraveling for years. David Foster's connection to Prince Harry once looked solid, even personal. Foster wasn't just another wealthy acquaintance circling royal proximity.
If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update.
He stepped into a mentor-like role, especially as Harry began pulling away from royal life and trying to understand the realities of fame outside palace walls. Foster knew Hollywood power structures, security risks, and how quickly goodwill could evaporate in the American media ecosystem. That guidance mattered during Harry's transition period. Leaving royal duties wasn't just a symbolic break. It came with real-world consequences. Security was no longer automatically handled. Costs mounted quickly, and decisions had to be made fast. Foster positioned himself as someone willing to help navigate that chaos. But mentorship only works if trust stays intact. According to people close to the situation, that trust eroded steadily. Harry's circle changed. Communication became strained. What once felt collaborative began to feel transactional. Foster wasn't just advising anymore. He was being pulled into logistical and financial problems that never seemed to fully resolve. That shift marked the beginning of the end. Foster's disillusionment sharpened after Harry's marriage to Meghan Markle. He didn't frame it as a single argument or dramatic fallout. Instead, he described a gradual change in tone and priorities. Decisions that once seemed thoughtful now felt impulsive. Commitments became vague. Expectations grew, while accountability thinned. The most damaging issues centered on money. Foster had fronted significant expenses connected to security and logistics during the Sussexes' transition. These weren't symbolic gestures. They were real costs paid out of pocket, with the understanding they would be reimbursed. That reimbursement did not come quickly or cleanly. As months passed, the unpaid obligations became harder to ignore. For someone like Foster, whose career depends on trust and professionalism, this wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was a breach. The longer it dragged on, the more it felt less like oversight and more like disregard. Foster reportedly felt taken for granted, and worse, misrepresented one's frustrations began surfacing quietly in industry circles. Security, initially an act of goodwill, became the central fault line. Foster helped connect the Sussexes with resources, advisors, and solutions during an unstable period. But instead of simplifying matters, the arrangement spiraled. Miscommunications multiplied. Boundaries blurred. Confidential details surfaced in places they shouldn't have. Those leaks hit Foster particularly hard. Discretion is currency in his world. Once questions arose about whether private efforts were being publicly reframed or selectively shared, his reputation was suddenly in play. That's not something he could afford, especially not for people who, by then, were signing massive media deals and presenting themselves as financially independent. The contrast was stark. Lavish lifestyles and major contracts on one side, outstanding bills and strained explanations on the other. That disconnect fueled resentment and confirmed Foster's growing sense that the relationship had shifted from mutual respect to one-sided expectation. At that point, the friendship wasn't just damaged. It was unsustainable. This rupture didn't exist in isolation. It mirrored a broader pattern surrounding Harry and Meghan's departure from royal life. Relationships that once seemed stable began falling away. Institutional ties weakened. Longtime supporters grew cautious. The couple's integration into American elite society proved far more complicated than early optimism suggested. Hollywood operates on loyalty, but also on boundaries. Favor is extended carefully and withdrawn quietly when trust erodes. Foster's experience reflected what many insiders were beginning to notice. Proximity to the Sussexes came with risk. Financial, reputational, and emotional. For benefactors used to controlled environments, that volatility was unsettling. The Sussexes' public disputes, media narratives, and shifting alliances clashed with Hollywood preference for behind-the-scenes problem-solving. Foster wasn't alone in reassessing his position. He was simply one of the first to draw a visible. By the time Foster decided to exclude Harry and Meghan from his Christmas party, the decision had already been made internally. The event wasn't the cause. It was the confirmation. Foster wasn't interested in salvaging optics or maintaining appearances. He wanted distance. Clean, unmistakable distance. Protecting his legacy mattered more than preserving a strained connection. Foster has spent decades cultivating credibility across industries. Being associated with unpaid obligations, leaked details, and unresolved conflicts threatened that wealth. Cutting ties wasn't emotional. It was strategic. Sources described Foster as calm but resolute. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public feud, just withdrawal. Invitation stopped, communication cooled. The door closed, firmly but quietly. In elite circles, that silence is often louder than any statement. The fallout extended beyond Foster himself. His distancing sent a signal to others watching closely. Hollywood power players pay attention to who disengages, and why. Foster's decision reinforced concerns that had already begun circulating privately about reliability and reciprocity. For Harry and Meghan, this represented another fracture in their network of American allies. Relationships built on shared purpose gave way to suspicion. Support that once flowed freely became conditional, then cautious, then absent. The promise of seamless integration into Hollywood's upper tiers began to look increasingly fragile. Each broken alliance raised questions about whether trust could be rebuilt, or whether patterns had already hardened too deeply. The Foster situation didn't define their future, but it complicated. In the end, this story isn't about a party invite. It's about boundaries, money, and the cost of blurred lines. Foster's experience underscores how quickly goodwill can sour when expectations go unmet and discretion breaks down. His decision to step away wasn't vindictive. It was protective. For Harry and Meghan, the episode stands as a warning about the realities of elite American circles. Status opens doors, but it doesn't replace accountability. Generosity has limits. Trust, once strained, is difficult to restore. If you found this breakdown helpful, take a moment to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and let others know what you think about how these high-profile relationships unravel. Subscribe for more deep dives into the moments where power, money, and reputation collide. Prince Harry's transition from royal to celebrity wasn't just a personal transformation, it was also a public experiment. Could someone born into monarchy successfully cross over into Hollywood's power elite? Could that leap be made without losing the very credibility that once set him apart? Foster's role early in that journey mattered. He wasn't a hanger-on. He was a trusted guide, someone who understood the delicate architecture of fame in America. When Harry needed help managing optics, navigating security risks, and building bridges in the right circles, Foster showed up. But once those bridges were crossed, something changed. What had once been a carefully managed alliance turned into a source of tension. Harry's ambitions expanded quickly, and with them came increasing pressure on people like Foster to accommodate, not just advise. The line between friend and facilitator became uncomfortably thin. Over time, it stopped feeling like collaboration and started to feel like Meghan Markle's integration into Hollywood's elite circles was always going to be complicated. She had roots in the entertainment industry, but her royal status elevated her into a realm where scrutiny operates at a completely different scale. In theory, her return to LA should have been a homecoming. In practice, it came with expectations, optics, and alliances that didn't always sync up. David Foster was one of the first major power players to extend real support. His wife, Catherine McPhee, had known Meghan from school, which added a sense of familiarity. Foster stepped up, believing the relationship could be mutually beneficial. That belief didn't last. From his perspective, the Sussexes became increasingly demanding. Requests piled up. Gratitude, in his view, thinned out. The lavish media deals they were securing contrasted awkwardly with the lingering debts and unmet commitments. As Meghan's public persona grew more polished, behind-the-scenes relationships began to strain. When unpaid obligations remained unresolved and leaks surrounding security arrangements surfaced, Foster reportedly began to feel not just used, but undermined. The problem wasn't just money. It was the symbolism of it. Foster wasn't chasing a reimbursement out of financial need. It was about principle. A promissory note, whether written or implied, carries weight in elite circles. When it's ignored, it signals more than oversight. It suggests a shift in values. The Sussexes, already under pressure to prove their independence, now faced questions about whether they understood or cared about the power dynamics of the environment they'd entered. Foster's disappointment wasn't rooted in drama. It was rooted in professionalism. He had helped them during a vulnerable time, expecting mutual respect in return. Instead, what he received felt transactional. Quiet warnings turned into passive distancing. Eventually, that became open exclusion. And in a world where social signaling is everything, being cut out of Foster's orbit spoke volumes. The tension between what's presented publicly and what's handled privately continued to widen. For Foster, it was a line that couldn't be. By the time the Christmas party came around, David Foster had made his position clear, without ever needing to explain it directly. The Sussexes weren't on the guest list. Their absence wasn't up for debate, and no apology or press release followed. That silence told the story. Foster wasn't staging a feud. He was protecting his legacy. After decades of careful brand management, he wasn't willing to attach his name to what he saw as chaos. The relationship had run its course, and the cost of maintaining it now outweighed any possible benefit. For Foster, the lesson was simple. Generosity needs boundaries. Helping someone doesn't entitle them to indefinite access. And when that help is met with what feels like avoidance or spin, the door closes fast. The exclusion was clean. It was strategic. And above all, it was final. Back in the UK, the optics weren't lost on anyone. While Meghan and Harry have long distanced themselves from palace life, the problems they face in Hollywood were beginning to echo the challenges they left behind. Trust, protocol, misaligned expectations. Their exit from royal duties had been framed as a path to freedom. But in chasing that freedom, they entered a world with its own set of unspoken rules. David Foster represented those rules. His snub wasn't about loyalty to the monarchy. It was about how influence and integrity function in elite American circles. What the Sussexes were discovering, slowly and publicly, was that shifting from one power structure to another doesn't mean you're exempt from scrutiny. If anything, it means the rules get even more unforgiving. The palace might have imposed tradition, but Hollywood demands reputation. And when that reputation is compromised, access disappears. In the months after the party, the ripple effects were clear. Other benefactors who had once extended open doors began re-evaluating their proximity to the Sussexes. Private discussions replaced public praise. Relationships were paused and partnerships delayed. David Foster hadn't just cut ties, he'd set a precedent. If someone with his connections and history was stepping back, others were bound to follow. The Sussexes were no longer just navigating press narratives. They were facing a reputational shift in the very circles they'd hoped to embrace. And in those circles, silence isn't passive. It's decisive. Every ignored call, every misinvite, every delayed deal reinforced a sense that their status was changing. Not because of scandal, but because of pattern. High society moves slowly. But once the tide turns, it doesn't turn back. Foster's refusal to speak publicly about the details only added to the impact. He didn't launch a media tour. He didn't release a statement. He simply stopped engaging. And that made the absence louder. In elite Hollywood, silence is both a shield and a sword. That silence allowed people to draw their own conclusions. And most of those conclusions weren't flattering to the Sussexes. It wasn't about drama. It was about consequences. The kind of consequences that come when trust is treated casually and debts are allowed to linger. For Foster, the logic was clear. Protect your brand. Guard your network. And if someone drags you into controversy or exposes your inner circle to unwanted attention, walk away before it gets worse. It wasn't personal anymore. It was about survival in an industry that doesn't. For Meghan, the fallout came with additional weight. Her identity as a former actress, a modern duchess, and a media figure meant every professional relationship was under the microscope. And the breakdown with Foster raised uncomfortable questions, especially from those who once viewed her as a rising power player in L.A. Whispers about the unpaid obligations, the security mishandling, and the social exclusion didn't just stay in private. They began shaping how she was perceived. Influence only lasts as long as the people around you believe in your credibility. Once that's gone, rebuilding it becomes a public uphill battle. And in Meghan's case, the pressure to stay polished while managing that fallout was relentless. The line between personal and professional had vanished, and what remained was a narrative she no longer controlled. Harry's predicament was different, but no less complicated. The loss of Foster as a mentor figure exposed how vulnerable he had become without a stable support network. The transition away from royal life had stripped away layers of built-in protection, and the Hollywood world he stepped into wasn't built for mercy. His allies, once plentiful, now seemed cautious. That caution wasn't always about disapproval. It was about liability. No one wanted to be tied to someone whose alliances were in question, especially not when high-profile deals, staff turnover, and public opinion were already painting a picture of instability. Foster's exit didn't create that instability, but it amplified it, and it reminded everyone watching that proximity to royalty doesn't guarantee security. Not in the palace. Not in California. Not anywhere. The broader implications are still unfolding. The Sussexes' rift with Foster was more than a private misunderstanding. It was a fracture with symbolic weight. It represented how trust, once compromised, has the power to unravel even the most glittering alliances. Hollywood might love a redemption arc, but it also demands consistency. Foster's distancing wasn't petty. It was methodical. And it echoed what others had started feeling but hadn't yet acted on. Relationships like these don't just dissolve. They leave marks on reputations, on opportunities, and on the unspoken ledger that governs elite circles. Foster may have closed his door quietly, but the reverberations made noise everywhere. For Harry and Meghan, the Foster freeze-out was more than just a personal embarrassment. It was a spotlight on their shifting reputation. At one point, they were the most sought-after names in the industry, riding the wave of royal escape with record-breaking interviews and lucrative contracts. But influence, especially in Hollywood, is fragile. It's not just about who you know. It's about who still want to be associated with you once the headlines cool down. The lack of follow-up from their side didn't go unnoticed either. No clarification, no quiet reconciliation, no effort, at least publicly, to address what had happened. That kind of silence reads differently when it comes after someone like David Foster cuts ties. People start wondering what's being said behind the scenes, what was promised, what was left hanging. And in a world obsessed with loyalty, that silence wasn't just avoidance. It looked like the optics on Foster's side couldn't have been more different. By simply choosing not to engage, he managed to protect both his reputation and his peace of mind. He didn't need to join the noise or insert himself into the headlines. His decision to leave the Sussexes off his guest list was message enough. In Hollywood, that kind of strategic silence is as effective as a press release. It told producers, executives, and high society regulars exactly where he stood. No drama, no damage control. Just one less name on the list, and a lot of people quietly nodding in agreement. Foster's brand is built on credibility. When that credibility started feeling compromised by association, he pulled the plug. Not for attention, but for... The timing also hurt Meghan in particular. Her public image was in the middle of a careful recalibration, shifting from overexposure to selective visibility. She had been making moves to reposition herself as a content producer, a philanthropist, and a media force with longevity. But Foster's quiet exit chipped away at the narrative. It's hard to reinvent yourself while questions about unpaid debts and broken trust linger, especially when one of the people asking those questions has decades of respect in the very industry you're trying to dominate. Even if no one speaks on record, the undercurrent remains. And when enough whispers build momentum, the damage is done long before it reaches the press. Reputation isn't about spin, it's about consistency. And Foster stepping back made it harder for Meghan to hold that line. For his part, appeared increasingly isolated. The detachment from Foster mirrored the larger pattern forming around him: strained relationships, shifting allegiances, and mounting skepticism. The very people who had once welcomed him as a novelty, royalty rebranded for the West Coast, were now treating him as a liability. His allies were fewer. His critics, more cautious and vocal, began disengaging. It wasn't betrayal. It was attrition. Slowly, subtly, the circles that had once embraced him began closing off, not with statements or confrontation, but with the kind of silence that Hollywood uses when it's done with someone. And the hard truth is, when the industry stops talking about you, it's often more damaging than when it talks too much. Back in royal-adjacent circles, the Foster situation only strengthened the argument that Harry and Meghan's departure from the firm had not led to the freedom they'd expected. They had traded one demanding institution for another. But in Hollywood, forgiveness doesn't come with tradition. It comes with optics, and optics were turning fast. Foster's retreat wasn't viewed as petty. It was seen as pragmatic. And for those still loyal to the monarchy, it reinforced the narrative that leaving the royal family hadn't liberated the couple. It had exposed them. The safety and structure of palace life, for all its constraints, never questioned their integrity this publicly. Hollywood, on the other hand, gave them the spotlight and then turned up the heat. To Foster, it probably wasn't personal anymore. It was operational. When connections compromise your standing, you make cuts, even if those cuts involve people you once mentored or supported out of genuine goodwill. His choice wasn't about making headlines or scoring points. It was about setting boundaries. Boundaries that hadn't been respected. He didn't need drama to make a point, just the absence of continued support. And that's exactly what he delivered. There's something powerful about someone walking away without a scene. No shade. No subtext. Just done. Foster didn't need to air grievances because the absence itself became the story. Now, the Sussexes are left navigating a new reality, one where relationships are no longer defined by novelty, but by track record, where access is granted not because of titles, but because of trust. And once that trust is broken, especially with someone as connected as Foster, the ripple effects are impossible to ignore. Every invitation that doesn't come, every contact who suddenly goes cold, every meeting that gets quietly rescheduled. Those are the consequences you don't see in headlines, but they shape futures. The Sussexes may still hold name recognition, but Hollywood power runs on mutual benefit. And Foster made it clear, the benefit was gone. What started as a royal fairy tale has turned into a lesson in the limits of influence. Titles may open doors, but relationships keep them open. And when people like David Foster walk away, others follow. Not because they want to take a side, but because they can't afford to be caught in the middle. The Sussexes came to America to build something new, but they are finding out that reinvention doesn't work without consistency, accountability, and real respect for the people who help you behind the scenes. It's not just about optics. It's about actions. And when those actions leave unpaid bills, leaked details, and strained friendships, the fallout isn't just social. It's systemic. Thanks for watching. If you're following this breakdown of Hollywood's quiet power plays and how trust really works in elite circles, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more inside stories where fame meets fallout.